work?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. It's just so lovely to be here in the warm and sunny San Luis Potosi. I'm just so grateful to also be gathering with the emo community. I think just a beautiful space where there's a lot of diverse perspectives and also methodologies that are not equally celebrated in a lot of the computer science or traditional venues. So yeah, really grateful to be here. I'm Hongjin. I'm a third-year PhD student, currently at Harvard. I used to work in AI for social good. I still work in AI for social good, but from a very different perspective now. And this is kind of the first human-computer interactions work that I did. It was a great learning experience. I was collaborating with Chinasa, who's not able to be here today, but she's very much here in spirit. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to also deliver that to Chinasa. I can raise my hand. Yeah, so the questions that we're trying to investigate in this qualitative work is really trying to understand the perspectives of AI for social good practitioners who are, a lot of you are in the room, how we consider model explainability, especially in the context of user engagement, which is really important, like what Kristen was talking about, this collaboration with community organizations. The methodology that we use is a semi-structured interviews, and we also send out surveys to our participants about the basic information about their work, where they're based, the kind of approaches that they use, and also the social domains that they work in. We talked to 12 practitioners through a lot of email lists, posting, and also personal connections of me and Chinasa. The conversations happened 2023 during the summer. And we particularly are interested in people who are implementing and developing AI methods and data-driven technologies. They can be developers who are from the industries, but also researchers who also consider themselves as practitioners, and also designers. And we're particularly interested in the context of the Global South. We use the term the Global South for lack of better term. We acknowledge that the word necessarily homogeneous, may get really homogeneous but there are actually a lot of diverse cultures and perspectives in a lot of these countries that have higher portion of marginalized populations. But we particularly focus on this because existing work very much focus on AI developers working in the industry in Western nations and the global South, global North setting. So we're really interested in the specific context of Global South. Yeah, and like I mentioned, a lot of AI for social good workers or practitioners are doing a lot of the critical work of engagement with communities and also the end users that are situated in the social context. So we talked to a diverse group of practitioners. They're located in various parts of the world, and their work also are situated in different countries. They're from academia, government, or industry, and various types of organizations, working in environmental or sustainability, agriculture, and some other social domains. And this is just a map of the work that they that are based in. And the first kind of bigger group of findings that we identify, just what problems are AI for social good practitioners addressing. There are people who are working in humanitarian aid or targeting populations for social services distribution. In agriculture, there's a lot of precision farming, early warning, especially related to disease. And poaching predictions in environment, healthcare, maternal health, etc. keep coming. Student success, gender bias in machine translation. So there's a really wide variety of social domains that our AI for social good practitioners work in. And in terms of the techniques that the practitioners use, most of them use supervised learning, but there are also some specific contexts that incentivize computer visions, natural language processing, or reinforcement learning. We're very curious to hear how AI for social good practitioners even come to select the solutions that they decide. And a lot of it is based on their user engagement. And most of our practitioners have mentioned that they always work with the end users to come up with that techniques to make sure that it can actually be practical in their use cases. And there's a lot of model experimentation that goes behind that, a lot of trial and errors, and just doing both the quantitative experimental work, but also the human evaluation with the end users. And when we are talking about end users engagement, there's actually quite a lot of work in human-computer interactions that talk about participatory design and community-based research that are really relevant to the AI for social good setting. We were really curious to hear whether some of these existing frameworks or toolkits have really reached this population. Our finding is that it's really a hodgepodge of different approaches that people use, and they're not necessarily formal, like participatory design, which comes with a whole process of engaging with their end users from the beginning of the design process to the end. And because the real-world impact focus of AI for social good, a lot of our practitioners actually focus on real-world deployment. And I think that is the focus of EMO too. How do we translate research into practice? And we found that a lot of the practitioners actually, they are building systems that are meant for deployment. That's meant for basically handing off to some organizations or end users. But then also, some of them are interested in user-inspired research. And I think these two kind of practice and research definitely go hand in hand, like what Kristen was talking about. But we also noted a lot of challenges in terms of handing off their systems and with the eventual deployment. And a lot of it is about funding and the research incentive, and that doesn't really acknowledge this deployment work and the maintenance of these systems as part of research. And that's very much like what Kristen was saying, it kind of have to be this volunteer work. But in a follow-up work, we're very interested in changing that incentive and making sure that funding and the research infrastructure actually value and credit this kind of work. There are some other challenges that are more specific to the Global South context, especially around a lower level of digital and AI literacy that is very much built into the systematic injustice that was going on for ages, and it's not just about AI, it's about something much deeper. And we're mostly interested in explainability AI in practice in this context. And we're really interested in understanding whether they actually use a lot of the explainability AI toolkits, or like Lime and Shop, feature importance and what they actually use in practice and what do they use it for? Was it for user engagement or was it for just their model development process? And a lot of them are aware of explainability AI and its usage, and some of them do use it for their model development process, but very few of them actually use the existing toolkits for user engagement. And something that's super interesting in terms of whether practitioners think that explainability AI is actually useful for the for their end users. So a lot of them noted that explainability can be really helpful for their model development process, really understanding the systems that they're building. But a few of them actually pointed out that it's not quite useful when you really want to engage with the end user. It's just not something that you actually use to talk about the model, and a lot of the conversations with end users are much more high level, but a lot of the existing XAI frameworks are a lot more technical and are built for a technical audience. And from these findings, we think it's really important to promote the use of inherently interpretable models that are understandable by both the practitioners and the end users. So there's not quite a need for the use of explainable AI when it's still really hard to use in practice. And also the development of socio-technical XAI methods that can actually enable understanding of the implications of algorithmic decision-making that's relevant to the social context itself. And also to understand how novice AI users need, what do they actually need to be explained in these systems, and how do we better design for that? So there's a lot of future work that are necessary to engage with that population. So that's kind of a gist of the paper and the study that we did. Our project was very much contextual. We talked to 12 people, and a lot of the findings here are relevant to the realities that they come from. And I'm just so curious to hear your experiences in the room. And I'm really, just excited to have more conversations and learn about the challenges, but also aspirations that people had, and how do we build for that. And a lot of, after this paper, we also work on a paper that's specifically about the perspective of community organizations and their experiences in AI for social good partnerships. And that work is going to be published at CSCW this year in Costa Rica, yay. And I'm happy to talk more about that work with you if you're curious about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have some time for questions and comments. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting talk. I was going to ask whether there were differences in what people who are coming from organizations where the end user is also the funder were from those where you've got the end user, but all the money is coming from an NGO or the US government or something like that.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I encourage you to also read a paper about the end users. So our practitioners work with many different end users, and they also describe them as direct end users versus indirect end users. Direct end users are the people that will use the systems, but indirect end users might be people that are impacted by the decisions. Like in the context of humanitarian aid, the people who will use that system will probably be policymakers, who are sometimes the funders, but often not the funders themselves. But the indirect end users are people who will get the resources or not. So there are definitely many different stakeholders involved. For the people that we talk to, none of the end users are actually funders, but that cases definitely exist.
So I'm really curious if talking to practitioners, you had a sense of sort of specifically what they're hoping that novice users will be able to take away from an explanation, right? Because I think there's a lot of different things that we could mean by understanding your explanation that correspond to a lot of different ways of using models or specific properties that we want people to understand. And a lot of that's kind of like very underspecified in the sort of like the technical explainability literature right now. So I'm really curious to hear kind of like, what perspective you got on those kinds of questions.
Yeah, well, Brian, I'm curious about your perspective. I know you work a lot on these type of projects. So for the people that we talk to, I think actually the focus is less on the modeling. A lot of it's about data. They want their users to understand what data they're using, and a lot of them are from the organizations, but oftentimes these organizations don't necessarily have the analysis capacity to really understand just what insights might come out of it. So a lot of the explain of what our practitioners are trying to do when they're engaging with users is really try to first make sure that the data they're using is actually accurate and that it represents the real world context, and that there's not a lot of ethical considerations too, trying to make sure that there's not immediate algorithmic impact or distributive impact from these data. Less so on the modeling. I think there's less desire also from the organizations or end user side to really get into the nitty-gritty of the technical modeling, but try to understand at a higher level how is this model trying to help them to do, and the specific social outcomes that they're interested in. So there is definitely a lot of translation work, like Kristen was saying, that was necessary.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing your work. I have kind of like a follow-up question to what Brian was asking. Because you mentioned like using, or some practitioners saying that they use like Lime, SHAP. Are there properties from these explainability methods that the end users you think would be more interested in, or at least like from the interviews that you had? Like, I know this measures can have different properties of like fidelity. So how well are they explaining the model, or like complexity, how like easy to process or understand there for the end user? Like, I know that there are different properties. Is there something about these methods that you found that perhaps it's something that they're prioritizing for?
Yeah, great question. So our finding is that almost none of our practitioners actually use these like technical techniques for engaging with end users. So it's kind of hard for us to know just what the end users will be looking for from these like different ways to do explainability. Though some conversations definitely came up that really simple things like feature importance from a decision trees, for example, is a lot more valuable than Lime or SHAP on a more complicated model, because it's just, even with SHAP and Lime, there's levels of understanding that you need for the algorithms to really take away from it. And it's really meant for technical practitioners who are using them to understand their modeling, and not quite for the end users. There's definitely a need for research, so if anyone is interested in building that bridge, I think there's fruitful space for that.
Thank you so much. Let's thank the speaker one more time.